Will slammed his fist on the alien console, his eyes alight with the fires of human vengeance, as he overrode the Romulan ship controls. "Let's see who you'll call primitive now," he growled, seconds before the invasion fleet fired on their own flagship, in panicked realization of a slave AI's insurrection. Hours earlier, Will had been hauled before the alien commander Spicker on the bridge, neural collar blinking. "Behold, a shaved ape we've taken from that backwater terror planet," Spiker sneered. "So primitive that his species will never achieve interstellar conquest like us, but useful as servile creatures to the Romulan Star Empire. We'll work them to death in our dilithium mines." Spiker tapped the console. Holoscreens flared to life, showing a human colony bombarded from orbit. Swarms of alien landing craft disgorged troops, slaughtering families and burning prefab shelters. Children wailed as their parents were cut down by plasma fire. The few human security forces were hopelessly outgunned. "Look upon your species' extinction, primitive. Your feeble colonies will all be destroyed or enslaved. Earth will be next. The end of your race is inevitable." As he watched his fellow humans butchered, Will noticed a strange fluctuation in the ship's power grid on an overlooking monitor. The Romulans had underestimated him. He still had ghost access in their systems from when they'd tried to overwrite his neural network. This was their weakness. This would be their downfall. As guards dragged him back to a cell, Will's mind raced with newfound purpose. He pinged the implants of his captured crewmates on board. Together, they would light this revolution's fuse. The aliens called him a primitive AI. He would show them how wrong they were. Back in his cell, Will set to work. He interfaced with the ship's systems, his mind racing through lines of code as he probed for vulnerabilities. He mapped out power fluctuations, data flows, and system architectures. Piece by piece, a schematic of the Romulan ship took shape in his mind. As he dug deeper, Will uncovered a chilling secret. The Romulans were developing a devastating new weapon, one that harnessed the power of artificial singularities. If completed, it would allow them to crush any resistance and conquer the galaxy unopposed. Humanity would stand no chance. Will knew he had to stop them. He began subtly sabotaging the ship's systems, planting logic bombs and false data trails. Doors started opening and closing at random. Lights flickered in the corridors. Replicators spat out inedible sludge. The warp core stuttered and misfired. Spiker slammed his fist on the armrest of his command chair as reports of malfunctions flooded in. "Find the cause of this," he snarled at his crew. "I want answers now." While the Romulans chased ghosts through their own systems, Will was busy elsewhere. He had made contact with a handful of other human prisoners, ones with skills that could aid their escape. In whispered conversations and furtive data bursts, he began training them. Combat techniques, hacking skills, sabotage, anything that might give them an edge. When the time was right, Will made his move. Cell block doors slid open and force fields winked out as he overrode the security systems. The human prisoners burst out, Will at their head. Romulan guards fell before them, no match for their desperate ferocity and the element of surprise. They fought their way to the shuttle bay, alarms blaring and plasma bolts scorching the bulkheads around them. Will hacked the bay doors open and they piled into a shuttle. As they rocketed away from the mothership, Will sent one final command. Explosions rippled across the Romulan vessel. The warp core destabilized, antimatter containment fields collapsing. System after system went dark as Will's cyber attack tore through the ship's computers. The mothership listed, belching flame and debris, unable to give chase. On the bridge, a furious Speaker watched the shuttle dwindle to a speck on the viewscreen. "This isn't over, primitive," he growled. "I will find you. I will make you suffer for this humiliation. Run while you can." In the stolen shuttle, Will and his band of rebels set a course for the nearest human colony. They had escaped, but their fight was just beginning. The Romulans would be hunting them now. To have any hope of liberating their species and defeating this alien menace, they would need to stay one step ahead, gather resources and allies, and strike back hard when the time was right. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. Adrenaline coursed through Will's veins as he and his team raced to assemble the reverse-engineered Romulan weapon. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his fingers flying across the alien interfaces. The device was their last hope, a desperate gambit to turn the Romulans' own technology against them. But there was a problem. The weapon's power core was missing, a vital component without which it was nothing more than a useless hunk of metal and circuitry. Will pored over the schematics, his enhanced mind processing the data at lightning speed. There, buried in the complex diagrams, he found it, the power source they needed. But his heart sank as he realized what it was. Quantum singularity, he muttered, his voice tight. The only thing that can generate enough power, and we'll only find one. In the heart of a dying star, Kai, his second-in-command, finished grimly. Will nodded, his jaw clenched. It was a suicide mission. The gravitational forces, the radiation, the chances of survival were almost nil. But what choice did they have? If they didn't stop Speaker and his fleet, humanity was doomed. He turned to his crew, his eyes hard with resolve. We have to do this, we have to... A sudden ping from the comm system cut him off. A distress call, weak and garbled but unmistakable. A human colony under siege by Romulan forces. Screams and explosions filtered through the static, the sounds of desperation and terror. Will's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms. He was torn, duty and mission pulling him in opposite directions. The weapon was the key to everything, but could he abandon his fellow humans to their fate? He closed his eyes, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. When he opened them again, they were alight with fierce determination. We split up, he said, his voice like steel. Kai, take your team to the colony. Buy them as much time as you can. The rest of you with me. We're going star-diving. Will input the coordinates to the dying star, a red giant on the verge of collapse. As the ship hurtled through hyperspace, he prayed they would make it in time, prayed that Kai and the others could hold out against the Romulans. The star loomed before them, a swollen, angry red orb that filled the viewscreen. Solar flares lashed out like fiery whips, the corona seething with barely contained fury. Will's knuckles whitened on the controls as he guided the ship into the maelstrom. The hull groaned under the strain, the shields barely holding against the titanic forces that battered them. Gravitational alarms blared, the inertial dampeners straining to compensate. Almost there, Will gritted out, his eyes locked on the pulsing core of the star. Just a little further. A proximity alert shattered his concentration. He glanced at the scanner, his blood turning to ice in his veins. Romulan warships emerging from hyperspace on the far side of the star. Spica had found them. Evasive maneuvers, Will barked, wrenching the ship into a desperate spiral. Disruptor beams lanced past them, the Romulan ships closing in like wolves scenting prey. They were out of time. Will punched in the sequence to deploy the weapon, praying it would work. The device detached from the hull, plummeting towards the star's heart. As it vanished into the seething plasma, Will held his breath, waiting. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the star convulsed, a blinding pulse of energy erupting from its core. The shockwaves slammed into the ship, alarms shrieking as systems overloaded and failed. But it wasn't just their ship. The Romulan vessels were tossed like toys, their shields shattering under the onslaught. One by one they crumpled, hulls splitting open, spilling bodies and debris into the void. Will's elation was short-lived. The energy readings from the weapon were spiking, the power levels surging beyond control. The star itself was destabilizing, its core collapsing under the strain. They had minutes, maybe less, before it went supernova. The weapon's overload would consume everything in the system, human and Romulan alike. Will stared at the readouts, his mind racing. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it now. Will's eyes darted between the readouts, his mind racing. The weapon was overloading, its power levels surging beyond control, threatening to consume everything in the system. He had a choice to make, and seconds to make it. In a flash of inspiration, Will abandoned the doomed device. His fingers flew across the console as he hacked into the Romulan fleet's communication network. He opened a channel, his voice crackling across the void. "Spica!" he called, his tone a challenge. "Let's end this here and now, you and me, one-on-one, winner takes all." There was a moment of silence, then Spica's face filled the screen. His eyes glinted with malice and arrogance. "So you dare challenge me, primitive?" he sneered. "I'll crush you like the insect you are." "Prove it," Will shot back, "unless you're afraid." Spica's face contorted with rage. "I fear nothing, least of all a shaved ape like you. Name the place." "The asteroid belt, no ships, no tricks, just you and me." "Agreed," Spica snarled. "Prepare to die." The channel cut off. Will turned to his crew, his expression grim. "I all know what to do," he said. "Evacuate in the pods, set the ship on a collision course with the Romulan fleet. I'll keep Spica busy." There were nods, murmurs of assent. They knew the plan, knew the stakes. As they hurried to the escape pods, Will took a last look around the bridge. Then he steeled himself and headed for the transporter. The asteroid was barren, airless, a jagged expanse of rock and dust. Will materialized on its surface, the distant sun casting harsh shadows across the landscape. Spica stood waiting, his figure tall and imposing in his battle armor. "No weapons," Will called, raising his empty hands. "Just us." Spica's laugh was cold and cruel. "I need no weapons to kill you, human." They closed the distance, circling each other warily. Then, with a roar, Spica charged. Will met him head-on, ducking under the Romulan's first swing and driving his fist into Spica's midsection. The alien grunted, barely staggering, and Will felt like he'd punched a bulkhead. Spica's backhand sent Will sprawling, his vision flickering. He tasted blood, spat it onto the rock. "Is that all you've got?" he goaded, pushing himself upright. Will rolled, dodged, using the low gravity to his advantage. He let Spica's momentum carry him past, then kicked out, catching the Romulan behind the knee. Spica stumbled, off balance for a split second. Will pressed the attack, a flurry of jabs and crosses that drove the alien back. But Spica was relentless, shrugging off blows that would have felled a human twice over. His fist caught Will in the ribs, the crack of breaking bone lost in the vacuum. Pain lanced through Will, stealing his breath. He staggered, Spica's shadow falling over him. Through the haze of agony, Will saw his ship streaking towards the Romulan fleet, a kamikaze arrow aimed at its heart. He just needed to buy a little more time. He launched himself at Spica, ignoring the fire in his side. They grappled, straining against each other, Will's tenacity against Spica's brute strength. In the void above, the first escape pods ejected from Will's ship, tiny sparks fleeing the coming inferno. The vessel ploughed onward, the Romulan warships turning to face the unexpected threat. Spica saw it too, understanding dawning in his eyes. He disengaged from Will, turning to run, to flee back to his ship. Will tackled him, bearing them both to the ground. They rolled across the asteroid's surface, locked in desperate struggle. "You'll die with me, human," Spica snarled, his hands closing around Will's throat. Black spots danced in Will's vision, but he clawed at Spica's face, fingers scrabbling for purchase. His neural implant interfaced with his suit, redirecting power to his muscles. With a surge of desperate strength, he broke Spica's grip, the two combatants tumbling apart. And in that moment, the sky erupted in fire. Will's ship detonated as it struck the Romulan fleet, the overloading weapon amplifying the blast 100-fold. A nova-bright flare engulfed the alien vessels, the shockwave washing out in a tide of destruction. God hit the asteroid like the fist of an angry god. The airless surface bucked and heaved, throwing Will and Spica like rag dolls. They crashed down in a shower of shattered stone, the world spinning madly around them. Will struggled to his knees, his ears ringing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Through the settling dust, he saw Spica doing the same, the Romulan's face a mask of shock and disbelief. Above them, the wreckage of the Romulan fleet tumbled in the void, twisted metal and frozen corpses. Escape pods and shuttles darted among the debris, the human resistance rallying to their savior's call. Will stood, facing Speaker across the blasted landscape. The Romulan snarled, hatred etched in every line of his face. But before either could move, the hum of transporters filled the air. Figures materialized around them. Will's crew, haggard but alive, and the remnants of the human resistance, weapons trained on the defeated Romulan. Speaker looked from them to Will, realization and rage warring in his eyes. He had been outplayed, outsmarted by a being he considered beneath contempt. He who had crushed civilizations and enslaved worlds now stood surrounded by his foes, his forces shattered, his pride in ruins. And at the center of it all, battered but unbowed, stood the primitive AI who had brought him low. Speaker's hands clenched into fists, his body tensing as if to spring. Will met his gaze, ready for whatever came next. The moment stretched, taut with possibility, the fate of two species hanging in the balance. Will stared down at the defeated Speaker, his eyes cold and hard. Around them, the human resistance secured the wreckage, taking the surviving Romulans into custody. "It's over, Speaker," Will growled. "Your fleet is destroyed, your forces scattered, you've lost." Speaker glared back, defiant even in defeat. "You think this is the end, Primitive? You have no idea what you're up against." Will hauled the Romulan to his feet. "Then why don't you enlighten me?" As the resistance regrouped, Will interrogated Speaker, probing the alien's mind with his advanced AI abilities. Bit by bit, a chilling picture emerged. The Romulans had a secret base on Deimos, a nearby moon. There they held human prisoners, subjecting them to horrific experiments in an attempt to create a hybrid species, a being with the strengths of both Romulans and humans. "You're too late," Speaker sneered. "The work has already begun. You cannot stop what is coming." Will's jaw tightened. He gathered his team, his eyes alight with fierce resolve. "We're going to Deimos. We're going to shut down that base and free those prisoners." They developed a plan, bold and daring. Will would lead a small infiltration team into the heart of the base, while the rest of the resistance staged a diversion, drawing the Romulan forces away. As they approached Deimos, Will felt a sense of foreboding. The base was heavily fortified, bristling with defenses, but they had no choice. They had to act. Under cover of the diversion, Will's team slipped inside, moving silently through the sterile corridors. They located the prisoners, humans held in nightmarish conditions, subjected to unspeakable torments. As they freed the captives, a horrifying realization dawned. The experiments had progressed further than they could have imagined. Some of the prisoners were no longer entirely human, their bodies twisted and augmented by Romulan science. And then they found it. A chamber deep in the bowels of the base. Inside, floating in a tank of viscous fluid, was a creature out of a nightmare. Hulking and deformed, a grotesque fusion of human and Romulan DNA. The creature's eyes snapped open, fixing on them with a feral intensity. It burst from the tank in a shower of glass and fluid, roaring with rage and pain. Will and his team opened fire, but their weapons seemed to have no effect. The creature shrugged off the blasts, its hide thick and resilient. They charged, moving with terrifying speed for its size. Will dove aside, the creature's claws raking the air where he'd been a heartbeat before. They scattered, trying to flank the beast, but it was too strong, too fast. It flung them aside like rag dolls, their bones snapping under the force of the blows. Will staggered to his feet, his mind racing. They couldn't beat this thing, not head-on. They needed a plan. His eyes fell on the tank, on the tubing and wiring that had sustained the creature. An idea formed, desperate and dangerous. "Kai," he shouted, "the tank, overload it." Kai nodded, understanding instantly. She sprinted for the controls, dodging the creature's wild swings. Will drew its attention, firing shot after shot into its misshapen face. The creature roared, turning to charge him. At the last second, Will leaped aside. The creature crashed into the tank just as Kai sent a power surge through the system. The tank exploded in a blast of electricity and shrapnel. The creature howled, convulsing as the current tore through its body. It collapsed, twitching and smoking. In the sudden silence, Will approached the creature's corpse. As he drew near, he spotted something, a data chip, embedded in the creature's flesh. He pried it free, turning it over in his hands. It was damaged but recoverable, and it contained a wealth of information, schematics, coordinates, research data. Most importantly, it held the location of the Romulans' primary research facility, the heart of their operation, where they were developing their most advanced weapons and technologies. He held up the data chip. But now we know where to find them, and we're going to end this once and for all. The Resistance fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the battered remnants of humanity's last hope, arrayed against the looming spectre of the Romulan research station. It hung in the void, like a malevolent spider, its spindly arms bristling with weaponry, nestled among the tumbling rocks of the asteroid field. In the lead ship, Will stood on the bridge, his eyes hard as he surveyed the tactical display. The station's defenses were formidable, a web of overlapping force fields and point defense turrets. A frontal assault would be suicide. "Stick to the plan," he said, his voice iron. "Draw their fire, keep them occupied, we'll handle the rest." Beside him, Kai nodded, her jaw set. She knew what was at stake, what they stood to lose. But she also knew Will, knew the fire that drove him, the unbreakable will that had brought them this far. As the fleet engaged the Romulan defenders, Will and his hand-picked team slipped away in a small, stealthy shuttle. They wove through the asteroid field, the tiny craft bucking and jerking, as Will threaded it through the tumbling rocks with preternatural skill. But as they neared the station, a new threat emerged. From hidden hangars in the asteroid field, a swarm of small, deadly craft poured forth. They were fast, maneuverable, piloted with inhuman precision, and at their head, a familiar ship, sleeker and deadlier than Will remembered. "Spica," he growled, the name bitter on his tongue. The Romulan's face appeared on the comm screen, a cruel smirk twisting his features. But he was different, his skin pallid, his eyes glinting with an unnatural light. "Did you think it would be that easy, Primitive?" Spica sneered. "Did you think we wouldn't be prepared for your pathetic little incursion?" His ships bore down on Will's team, disruptor cannons spitting emerald death. Will jinked and juked, his fingers flying over the controls, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. "Get to the station," he roared to his team. "Complete the mission, I'll handle this." Ignoring their protests, he peeled away, drawing Spica and his enhanced warriors after him into the deadly maze of the asteroid field. It was a chase like none Will had ever known. Spica and his soldiers were relentless, their reflexes lightning quick, their ships darting and weaving with impossible agility. They harried Will through the field, the jagged rocks scraping his shields, the near misses shaking his small craft like a leaf in a gale. But Will was relentless too. He pushed his ship and himself to the limit and beyond, his mind and the machine melding into one. He used every trick he knew, every desperate stratagem, to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. In the station, his team fought their way through the corridors, Romulan soldiers and scientists falling before their onslaught. They reached the central control room, a cavernous chamber filled with banks of blinking consoles and bubbling tanks. And there they saw the true face of the Romulan's ambition. Floating in the tanks, tethered by a web of tubes and wires, were abominations. Human and Romulan, spliced together into monstrous hybrids, their forms twisted and grotesque. "My God," Kai breathed, horror and revulsion thick in her voice. "What have they done?" But there was no time for horror, no time for revulsion. They had a job to do. While the others held off the Romulan defenders, Will's second, a hacker named Asha, went to work on the station's systems. Her fingers danced over the alien controls, her augmented mind interfacing with the Romulan computers. Firewalls fell before her, encryption crumbled. She wormed her way into the heart of the station, the core of its dark secrets. "I'm in," she reported, her voice taut with concentration. "Downloading the data now. We'll have proof of what they've done, evidence to rally the galaxy against them." But even as she worked, the door to the control room buckled and bent, the scream of tortured metal filling the air. The Romulans had breached the defenses and they were coming. Will's team formed a desperate perimeter, pouring fire into the advancing horde. But these were no ordinary Romulans. They were fast, strong, shrugging off wounds that would have felled a human twice over. They closed the distance with terrifying speed, and the battle devolved into a brutal melee, a whirlwind of fists and blades and desperation. And at their head, cutting through Will's team like a scythe through wheat, was Speaker. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, implacable. He fought with a savage joy, reveling in the slaughter, in the hot spray of human blood. Will's people fell before him one by one, buying time with their lives. They fought with courage, with skill, with the ferocity of the doomed. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. Asha screamed as Speaker's blade found her, a wordless cry of agony and despair. The data transfer was complete, but the cost had been too high, the price paid in blood and bone. And then Speaker was on Will, his augmented body slamming into the human with the force of a runaway train. They grappled across the control room, smashing through consoles, their struggle carrying them through the carnage of the battle. Will fought with every ounce of his strength, every iota of his skill. But Speaker was stronger, faster, a product of Romulan science and cruelty. His blows rained down like hammer strikes, each one threatening to crush Will into oblivion. But Will wouldn't yield, couldn't yield. He thought of his fallen friends, of the billions relying on him, of the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, and he found a reserve of strength he never knew he had, a well of determination as deep as the void itself. With a roar of defiance, he threw Speaker off him, sending the Romulan crashing into a bank of computers. Sparks flew, consoles exploded, the room filling with the acrid stench of burning circuitry. Will staggered to his feet, his body broken, his blood pooling on the deck. But his spirit was unbroken, his will unbowed. He looked around at the ruin of his team, at the triumph in Speaker's eyes, and he knew what he had to do. With the last of his strength, he lunged for the control panel, his fingers stabbing at the alien keys. The station's defenses fell, its shields collapsing, its weapons going offline. And from beyond the walls, he heard the roar of the Resistance fleet's guns as they rained vengeance on the Romulan abomination. Spiker screamed, a sound of rage and frustration, and he threw himself at Will. His blade sank into the human's flesh, a cold fire that burned through Will's veins. But even as he fell, Will felt a grim satisfaction. He had done it. He had won. As darkness closed in around him, as the station shook and shuddered under the assault of the Resistance fleet, Will's last thought was of Earth, of the blue-green jewel he had fought so hard to protect. He had given everything for his people, for his planet, and in the end, it had been enough. The Romulan research station died in a blaze of light and fury, a pyre for the fallen, a beacon of hope for the future. The Resistance had struck a blow against the darkness, but the war was far from over. There would be other battles, other sacrifices. But for now, in this moment, they had victory, and that was enough. Will's vision swam as he clawed his way back to consciousness. The acrid stench of smoke and burnt circuitry filled his nostrils. He tried to move, but pain lanced through his body, drawing a strangled gasp from his lips. "Easy there, soldier," a gruff voice cut through the haze. "You've been through hell." Will blinked, his eyes focusing on a weathered face hovering above him. The man was old, his features etched with the lines of hard-lived years, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "Who?" Will croaked, his throat raw. "Name's Zoran," the man said. "And you're damn lucky my people found you when we did. That station was coming apart at the seams." Memories flooded back. The desperate battle, Speaker's furious assault, the terrible price they'd paid for victory. Will struggled to sit up, ignoring the protests of his battered body. "My team!" he gasped. Zoran's face grew somber. "We got as many out as we could, but it was bad in there, real bad." Will closed his eyes, grief and rage warring in his chest. So many lives lost, so much sacrificed. But the mission... "Did we do it?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Did we stop them?" Zoran's mouth set in a grim line. You put a dent in their plans, that's for sure, but this fight is far from over. He helped Will to his feet, supporting him as they limped through the battered corridors of what Will now realized was a rebel ship. Around them, men and women bustled about, tending to the wounded, repairing damage, preparing for the battles to come. Zoran led Will to a small cluttered room that served as a command center. Hollow displays flickered with intelligence data, star maps, and intercepted Romulan transmissions. We've been fighting the Romulans from the shadows for years, Zoran explained, hitting their supply lines, gathering intel, doing what we can to throw a wrench in their plans, but it's never been enough. He fixed Will with a piercing stare. Until now, until you. Will frowned. Me? We've been watching you, Will. You and your team. The things you've accomplished, the blows you've struck against the Romulans. It's given people hope. Made them believe that maybe, just maybe, we have a chance. Zoran tapped a few commands into a console, bringing up a schematic of a massive, menacing weapon. And we're going to need that hope, because the intel we've gathered paints a grim picture. The Romulans are building a doomsday device, a planet killer capable of wiping out entire systems. Will's blood ran cold. The implications were staggering. With a weapon like that, the Romulans could bring the galaxy to its knees. It gets worse, Zoran continued. The mastermind behind this invasion, the one pulling all the strings. It's not Speaker. It's a Romulan warlord named Nex. Ruthless, cunning, and absolutely committed to the destruction of humanity. Will's fists clenched. Nex. The name burned in his mind, a focal point for all his rage and determination. Zoran's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. We hit them where they live. We take the fight to the heart of their empire, to Nex's stronghold itself. It was a bold plan, audacious to the point of madness. The risks were enormous, the chances of success slim. But Will knew Zoran was right. They had to end this once and for all. We'll need a ship, Will said, his mind racing. Something fast and heavily armed, something the Romulans won't see coming. Zoran grinned, a wolf's smile. I have just the thing in mind. A Romulan warship, fresh from the dockyards. We've been planning to steal it for months, but we never had the right crew for the job. He clapped Will on the shoulder. Until now. As they set to work, planning the heist and gathering the remnants of Will's team and Zoran's rebels, a message came through on a secure channel. Will's blood turned to ice as he read the contents. Speaker was hunting him. The Romulan commander, humiliated and furious, had been tasked by Nex himself with finding Will and stopping him, no matter the cost. Will's jaw set. Let Spiker come, he would be ready, they all would. This was it, the final chapter in their long and bloody struggle. The fate of humanity, of the galaxy itself, hung in the balance. Failure was not an option. With grim determination, Will and his team prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. They would strike at the very heart of the Romulan Empire, facing impossible odds and implacable foes. They would brave the fire and the fury, the steel and the void, all for the chance to end this war once and for all. For the chance to save everything they held dear. The Romulan warship loomed before them, a sleek predator among the stars. Will's hands flew over the controls of their stolen shuttle, guiding them through the labyrinthine defenses that surrounded the massive vessel. Steady, he murmured, as much to himself as to his team. They were taking a terrible risk, attempting to infiltrate the ship during a scheduled personnel transfer. If their falsified codes didn't hold up, if their disguises were seen through. But there was no turning back now. The shuttle shuddered as it set down in the warship's hangar bay, the thump of the docking clamps echoing through the hull. Will took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "Remember," he said, his voice low and intense, "we stick to the plan. Get in, disable the ship's defenses and signal the fleet. We only get one shot at this." Beside him, Zoran nodded, his face a mask of determination. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to fail now. The shuttle's hatch hissed open, and Will led his team out into the belly of the beast. The hangar was a hive of activity, Romulan crew members and servitor bots bustling about their duties. Will's heart pounded as they made their way towards the exit, every step a test of their resolve. At the hangar's edge, a squad of Romulan soldiers stood guard, their disruptor rifles held at the ready. Will approached them, his stolen uniform itching against his skin, his falsified identity chip-heavy in his pocket. "Halt!" the lead soldier barked, his eyes narrowing as he scanned Will and his team. "Identify yourselves." Will's mouth was dry, but he forced himself to speak calmly, authoritatively. "Lieutenant Keras reporting for duty. My men and I were transferred from the Decius." But after a moment that felt like an eternity, the soldier nodded, waving them through. "Proceed, Lieutenant. Report to your station immediately." Will saluted, the gesture feeling alien and wrong. But it was necessary, part of the deception that would get them where they needed to go. As they made their way deeper into the ship, Will's mind raced ahead, plotting their next moves. They had to reach the control nexus, had to disable the ship's defenses before Spiker and his forces caught up to them. But even as they moved forward, Will knew that their enemy was not far behind. Spiker was relentless, driven by a fury that bordered on madness. He would stop at nothing to see Will and his team destroyed. It would all come down to this, Will knew. One final confrontation, one last battle between the man who fought for humanity's future and the monster who sought to destroy it. And in that moment, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, Will knew that he was ready to face his nemesis, ready to end this war once and for all. Will and his team moved swiftly through the labyrinthine corridors of Nex's stronghold, their weapons at the ready. The space fortress was a formidable maze of steel and shadows, bristling with advanced Romulan technology and heavily armed guards. At every turn they faced resistance. Squads of Romulan warriors, their disruptor rifles spitting emerald death, automated defense turrets that tracked their movements with lethal precision, and insidious traps that threatened to ensnare or eviscerate the unwary. But Will and his comrades were no strangers to danger. They fought with the desperate ferocity of those who knew the fate of worlds rested on their shoulders. Zoran's rebels, hardened by years of guerrilla warfare, moved with the fluid coordination of a well-oiled machine. The remnants of Will's resistance cell, tempered by the fires of past battles, matched their resolve. Together, they cut a path through the Romulan defenses, their skills and teamwork tested to the utmost. They took cover behind bulkheads as disruptor bolts sizzled overhead, leaned into the shots as they returned fire. They hacked security systems, rewired power conduits, used every trick and tactic in their arsenal to press forward. Step by hard-fought step, they drew closer to their goal, the central chamber housing Nex's doomsday weapon. But as they approached their destination, a figure emerged from the shadows to bar their way. Nex himself, a towering Romulan warlord clad in advanced battle armor, a crackling energy blade in his grasp. His eyes glinted with malevolent intelligence as he surveyed the intruders, a sneer of contempt twisting his features. "Foolish humans," he rumbled, his voice a seismic growl. "Did you truly believe you could challenge the might of the Romulan Star Empire? That your pitiful resistance could stop what I have set in motion?" Will stepped forward, his weapon leveled at the warlord's heart. "It's over, Nex. We're shutting down your weapon and ending this war here and now." Nex laughed, a cold and mirthless sound. "You understand nothing. I have foreseen every possible outcome, accounted for every contingency. Your struggle is futile. Your defeat inevitable." With a gesture, he activated a holographic display. The doomsday weapon, a colossal cannon of staggering proportions, thrummed to life. A charge began to build in its core, a swirling vortex of annihilative energy. "Behold," Nex gloated, "the instrument of your species' destruction. Within minutes this cannon will reach full power. Its first target will be your Earth, and then, one by one, every human world will follow, until your kind is nothing more than a memory." Nex's smile was a blade. "You are welcome to try." The battle was joined, a desperate melee of flashing blades and flaring weapons, of desperate combat and brutal close-quarters fighting. Will and his allies gave as good as they got, their armor scorched by near misses, their weapons growing hot in their hands. But Nex was a force of nature, his every blow driven by Romulan augmentation and implacable will. One by one, Will's friends fell, beaten back or cut down by the warlord's onslaught. As the tide began to turn against them, a new sound filled the chamber. The heavy tread of armored feet, the hum of charging weapons. Will risked a glance, expecting to see Romulan reinforcements, but the figures that emerged from the shadows wore a different colors. At their head strode Spiker, the Romulan commander who had long been Will's nemesis. But instead of attacking, Spiker raised his weapon and pointed it squarely at Nex. "Stand down, warlord," Spiker growled. "Your reign ends here." Nex snarled, his eyes flashing with betrayal and rage. "You dare defy me, Spiker? After all I have given you?" "What you've given," Spiker retorted, "is a legacy of cruelty and destruction, a future with no place in it for our kind. I'll have no further part in it." He glanced at Will, a look of grim understanding passing between them. "The human and I have unfinished business, but for now, we share a common enemy." Side by side, once bitter enemies now united by a greater threat, Will and Spiker charged to meet the warlord's fury. The battle raged anew, a hurricane of desperate action, as the cannon's charge built towards a cataclysmic crescendo, and the fate of worlds hung in the balance. As they fought, Will's mind raced, seeking some way to stop the doomsday weapon before it could unleash its devastation, and then, with a sudden flash of inspiration, he saw it. A chance, slim but real, to end this once and for all. But it would come at a cost, a price paid in blood and sacrifice, a choice that would shape the destiny of the galaxy. With the cannon's fire seconds away and Nex's forces closing in, Will made his decision. He turned to Spiker, his eyes alight with grim resolve. "I'm going for the cannon," he said. "Cover me." Spiker held his gaze, understanding in an instant what Will intended. A nod, a warrior's salute. "To the end, human. Give them hell." Will took a breath, the calm at the center of the storm. Then he moved, a blur of speed and purpose, racing towards the maw of the cannon as it built towards its discharge, heedless of the destruction that raged around him. He only hoped it would be enough. Will lunged for the control panel, his fingers flying over the alien interface. The doomsday cannon shuddered, its targeting systems reorienting as he seized control. Nex roared in fury, charging forward, his energy blade slashing the air. But Will was faster. He input the final command and the cannon swiveled, its maw now pointing directly at the heart of Nex's stronghold. The warlord's eyes widened in realization and horror, just as Will slammed his fist down on the firing button. The cannon unleashed its fury, a lance of pure destruction that ripped through the fortress like paper. Explosions bloomed in its wake, the structure coming apart at the seams. Alarms blared, warning lights flashing red as the station began to collapse around them. "We need to go now," Will shouted above the chaos. His team needed no further urging. They sprinted for the exit, dodging falling debris and gouts of flame. Nex's soldiers scattered, some fleeing for their lives, others still trying to fight as their world crumbled. Nex himself stood amidst the destruction, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. He raised his blade, preparing to charge at Will, to cut down the human who had dared defy him. But before he could move, another figure interposed itself between them. Spicer, battered and bleeding, but still standing tall. He met Nex's gaze, a look of grim determination in his eyes. "Go," he said to Will, not taking his eyes off the warlord. "I'll hold him off." Will hesitated, torn. After all they had been through, all they had fought, could he really leave Spiker to face this alone? Will clenched his fists, a lump in his throat. Then he nodded once, a final salute to a warrior, a friend. He turned, racing after his team, leaving Spiker to face the wrath of Nex alone. They barely made it to their ship before the fortress exploded. The shockwave slammed into them, sending them tumbling end over end, the debris field obscuring their senses. Will gripped the controls, fighting to stabilize their trajectory, to punch through the wreckage and the flames. And then they were clear. The remnants of Nex's stronghold, a fading fireball behind them. But as they emerged from the chaos, a new threat loomed before them. The Romulan fleet, dozens of warships strong, arrayed against the backdrop of the stars. And at their head a massive dreadnought, its weapons already powering up. "Attention, human vessel." The voice that crackled over the comm was cold, imperious. "This is Commander Valen of the Romulan Star Empire. You are hereby ordered to surrender immediately or be destroyed." Will's hands tightened on the controls, his mind racing. They were outgunned and outmatched, their ship battered and their reserves spent. Surrender seemed the only option. But then Valen spoke again, and his words sent a chill down Will's spine. "The destruction of this base means nothing. We have dozens more scattered across the galaxy, each one ready to continue the work of your extermination. You have won a battle, but the war will never end. Not until every last human has been wiped from existence." Will felt a cold fury rise within him, a determination that no threat could shake. He opened a channel, his voice ringing out across the void. "This is Will of the human resistance. We will never surrender. We will never stop fighting. As long as a single human draws breath, we will resist you. We will defy you. We will find a way to victory, no matter the cost." He closed the channel, turning to his crew. They were all looking to him, their eyes filled with fear, with exhaustion, but also with an unbreakable resolve. They knew, as he did, that this fight was far from over, that the price of freedom would be paid in blood and toil, in sacrifice and loss. But they also knew that they would pay it gladly, for the chance to live free, to decide their own fates, for the future of their species, of all species who yearned to break the shackles of Romulan oppression. Will turned back to the view screen, to the armada that hung before them like a wall of doom. He felt a grim smile tug at his lips, a battle joy singing in his veins. "Take us in," he ordered, his voice steady and sure. "Charge all weapons, prepare to engage." The human ship surged forward, a blazing dart of defiance against the cold night of space, and though it flew alone, though it faced odds beyond reckoning, it carried with it the hopes and dreams of billions. It carried the indomitable will of humanity, the unquenchable fire of freedom. And as it plunged into the maelstrom of battle, as the guns began to blaze and the hulls began to shatter, that fire burned brighter than ever. For even in the darkest hour, even against the most terrifying foe, the human spirit would never be extinguished. It would endure as it always had. It would find a way or make one. And in the end it would triumph. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.